In an opulent mansion nestled in the heart of an upscale neighborhood, where the streets were lined with luxury cars and imposing villas, Amélie was preparing for a prestigious event. The walls of his room, draped in silk and decorated with refined gilding, reflected an almost unreal luxury. Inside, a dim light diffused around her, casting soft shadows on her face. Her graceful silhouette was outlined in the golden mirror, her movements perfectly measured. The designer dress she wore, a deep blue, shimmered under the candles which illuminated the room with a warm, almost magical glow. Every movement she made seemed perfectly orchestrated, every detail of her appearance carefully chosen. The evening was important. She was finally going to introduce her fiancé, Hugo Lefebvre, to her family. Hugo, an influential businessman and heir to a real estate empire, was the epitome of success and elegance. His name resonated in the most exclusive circles, and his partnerships with renowned politicians and investors placed him at the top of the social elites. But in the privacy of her room, Amélie felt a slight unease. She was not alone. Elena, her nanny, who had accompanied her throughout her childhood, was there, by her side. Elena had always been present in the key moments of her life, a reassuring constant in Amélie's ever-changing world. But today, the mother figure she played seemed so different in this context of worldliness. The young nanny she had once been was nothing more than a memory, erased by years of devotion. Elena's skin bore the marks of time, each line on her face telling stories of sacrifice and hard work. Her hands, now more wrinkled, were still imbued with the gentleness of those who, like her, had devoted their lives to others. But behind the wrinkles hid an infinite wisdom, a deep benevolence that had never left his gaze. Elena had seen Amélie grow, from the fragile and shy little girl she was, to the sophisticated, brilliant and graceful woman she had become. However, at this precise moment, Amélie felt a distance that she had not anticipated. A social distance that only widened as she rose in the world of privilege and appearances. Social parties, business meetings, and exclusive events in luxurious places were now her daily life, a world where Elena's place seemed ever more blurred. She was a figure from her past, but in this world where the rich and powerful dictated the rules, Elena, a black woman of modest origins, had no place. Amélie knew it, even if she never wanted to admit it. The feeling of discomfort didn't leave her, although she tried to ignore it. As she adjusted her dress in front of the mirror, she heard the sound of guests arriving in the large living room. The laughter, excited whispers, and classical music that filled the room with a soft but pretentious melody reminded her that the evening was about to begin. Amélie's family, Hugo, and their guests sat in the sumptuously decorated living room. Velvet sofas, sparkling chandeliers, master paintings adorning the walls, and glasses of champagne sparkling under the lights. The scent of the fresh flowers that decorated the room mingled with that of the delicate perfumes of high society. Elena, true to her role as housekeeper, made sure everything was perfect. She had overseen every aspect of the event, from the platters of petit fours to the perfectly placed candlesticks. But all she wanted, in reality, was to melt into the shadows of this room, far from prying eyes, far from the worldly conversations that she no longer understood. She had no place here, and every step she took, every glass she carried, seemed a cruel reminder of her position in this universe where she was only a shadow, a servant, invisible. However, Elena said nothing about it. She was too used to playing this role. It was only in the rare moments when she found herself alone with Amélie that her fatigue was felt. It was then that the incident happened. Soline's entry into the room shook the atmosphere. Soline, Hugo's fiancée, was a woman with an icy and implacable appearance. Her slender figure, framed by carefully straightened brown hair, attracted everyone's attention. His smile, cold and calculated, seemed a mask to hide an obvious arrogance. As soon as she arrived, she looked around to see where Elena was, and a glimmer of irritation flashed in her eyes when she saw the nanny in the room, dressed simply, far from the extravagant outfits of the other guests. Amélie, although she never had positive feelings towards Soline, did not expect the situation to take such a turn. Soline, without any embarrassment, approached Elena and, with an icy tone, ordered her to clear the champagne glasses from the table where she was. "Are you the one handling these kinds of tasks now?" she asked in a haughty voice, her eyes resting disdainfully on Elena's simple, understated outfit, in stark contrast to the evening gowns and impeccable suits that surrounded them. The silence in the room suddenly became heavy, oppressive, like an invisible veil that weighed down the air. Amélie, her eyes riveted on the scene, felt a knot forming in her throat. Her hands clenched slightly on the glass of champagne she held, her fingers turning pale with the pressure. She wanted to intervene, but something was holding her back. Soline's icy gaze, this mixture of disdain and superiority, had paralyzed her. The heavy silence dragged on, and Amélie felt trapped in an invisible web, trapped between the long-standing friendship she had with Elena and the pressure of a society she knew well, but which pushed her into a corner she did not want to see. Elena, however, did not give in to the temptation to answer. She remained absolutely calm, her face impassive, but her eyes, those black eyes imbued with wisdom and resilience, said it all. Without a word, she took the glasses of champagne, a simple but dignified gesture. She didn't need to explain herself, justify her presence, or get into a verbal fight. This silence, this simple look that she had given to Soline, was a form of mute but impactful response, a silent reproach, an act of resistance in the face of humiliation. And then the worst happened. Soline, not satisfied with this first affront, added, without restraint, her scathing remark, almost like a weapon intended to inflict an even deeper wound. "Really, don't you find that a little indecent? A black woman, cleaning here while I have everything to myself. You should really rethink your priorities." The resonance of his words filled the room. It was as if everything had stopped suddenly, a suspended moment where time seemed frozen, where you could almost hear every breath. The guests, at first frozen in silent stupor, watched, shocked but too embarrassed to intervene. Each of them found themselves caught in a silent dilemma, shared between the shame of this scene and the fear of expressing solidarity that could put them in an uncomfortable position. Amélie suddenly felt overcome by an icy cold. Every word Soline spoke seemed to hit his heart like a hammer. Elena's humiliation resonated in her chest with a violence she had never imagined. It was not just the humiliation of a simple servant, but that of a woman who had made Amélie what she was today, who had raised her, protected her, and who, today, was thrown into the arena of the contemptuous indifference of others. The evening continued, but Amélie felt elsewhere, as if disconnected from the atmosphere around her. The music, the laughter, the happy conversations. It all seemed to dissolve into a distant fog. She only had eyes for Elena, this figure who, since her earliest childhood, had watched over her with unwavering affection. Elena was more than a nanny, more than just an employee. She had been the mother that Amélie never had, the confidant of her sorrows, the protector of her fragile dreams. And today, this woman was relegated to the role of servant, without anyone seeming to object. As the guests began to disperse, and the voices became more discreet, Amélie found herself alone in this vast residence, but the solitude was no longer that of hushed comfort. She was overcome by a feeling of suffocation, of profound isolation. The golden walls of the house seemed to close in on her, and she realized that she was now faced with a moral dilemma that was tearing her apart. As the last doors closed, and the subdued evening light flooded the room, Amélie approached Elena slowly, as if she were afraid of breaking this heavy silence, this silence loaded with 1,000 unsaid words. Her eyes filled with tears that she could no longer contain. Rebellion, despair and shame mixed in a whirlwind of emotions that overwhelmed her. She had witnessed this injustice, and now she had to face the consequences. "I'm sorry, Elena," she whispered, her voice breaking. I should never have let this happen." Elena looked at her for a long time, her dark eyes boring into Amélie's, as if she were trying to read the whole truth there, the one that her young protégé had not yet understood. A sad smile, but imbued with deep wisdom, slowly appeared on his lips. "You are not responsible for what happened, Amélie," she finally said in a calm, almost gentle voice. "But it's time for you to understand something. Life doesn't owe you anything. It doesn't owe you beauty, or wealth, or even love. But what you do with what you have, what you choose to be, is what defines you." Elena's words slowly soaked into Amélie's mind, like fine rain that penetrates the earth without noise, but with an inescapable force. The weight of this truth, so raw, so direct, made her waver. This was not an easy lesson to accept, nor an easy truth to digest. For years, Amelie had believed that everything was due to her, that beauty, wealth, and even love, came with her status, her name, and her environment. But what Elena told her was quite the opposite. Life owed her nothing, and it was not in the privileges she had received that she was going to find her value. That evening, in the vast empty house, surrounded by the echoes of laughter and discussions that had dissipated, Amelie felt a void that no wealth could fill. The realization came slowly but relentlessly. She then understood that she had not only betrayed Elena by remaining silent, but also betrayed her own values. She had allowed herself to be blinded by a world that treated people like Elena as invisible, relegated to roles of servitude, despite all their sacrifices. It was a cruel truth that Amelie had avoided until then, a reality that she had ignored in her comfort, but which now hit her hard. Elena was not a simple nanny or a maid, but a woman of dignity and courage, who had sacrificed so much for the education and well-being of others, and yet, this world returned this humiliation to her. A world where racism and discrimination were so deeply rooted that even those in the most vulnerable position found themselves invisible, treated like shadows. The following days were marked by deep introspection for Amelie. Every conversation, every meeting, every moment of his past life now seemed like an illusion to him. She could no longer continue to live in a world where discrimination was tolerated, where the humble were reduced to subordinate roles, where the humiliation of a woman like Elena was seen as just an insignificant detail in the grand scheme of things. She had witnessed the injustice, but she had not reacted. She had let Elena's suffering unfold before her eyes without doing anything. She felt tired, exhausted by this existence where indifference and comfort prevailed over humanity and dignity. And more than anything, she realized that she had betrayed her own integrity, that she had strayed from what she knew was right. It was then that Amelie made a radical decision. She broke off her engagement to Hugo. It was not a decision she took lightly, but she knew deep down that she could no longer live in a world where discrimination and injustice were considered normal, where her own life was built on the exploitation of the work and sacrifices of others. By breaking up with Hugo, she was also breaking up with a part of herself, the part that had accepted this superficial and unfair world. In the weeks that followed, Amelie grew closer and closer to Elena. She begged her to forgive him, recognizing the extent of her complicit silence. But Elena, with all the wisdom she had acquired over the years, didn't blame him. She knew that Amelie's transformation would not be immediate, but she understood that it was now time for her to stand up and make her voice heard. Together, they came up with a plan. A plan to expose injustice, to denounce what they had experienced. Amelie publicly denounced Soline's attitude, exposing her racist behavior and cruelty, without fear of consequences. This position had a media impact, creating a whirlwind of debate on racial and social inequalities. Soline, humiliated by this public revelation, lost everything: her social status, her respect, and her support. She no longer appeared as an envied person, but as an outcast. But for Amelie, the consequences were just as serious. Although she was under fire and some considered her a traitor to her own world, she gained the respect of those who saw her as a naive and privileged young woman. She no longer cared about other people's opinions, because she had finally found her own way. She had made a choice, a difficult but necessary choice, to stand alongside those who were oppressed, those who had no voice. Beyond the break with her past, Amelie's transformation materialized in concrete actions. She embarked on projects to support oppressed women and minorities, creating an organization dedicated to helping victims of racial discrimination. Elena, finally freed from her subordinate position, became the main advisor of this organization. She was now a symbol of strength, resilience, and dignity for all those who fought in the shadows. As for Soline, she lost everything: her wealth, her status, and her place in this world that she believed to be hers. But that was not the end of his story. It was only the beginning of his downfall. Amelie, for her part, discovered a new path in life, a path where dignity, respect, and love were the true treasures, much more precious than money, power, and appearances. She now knew that the only true wealth was found in the hearts of others, and in the way you chose to live your own life.